They won't admit it now, oh no. Right now they'll mock you, call it luck, madness, desperation, anything but brilliance. Because to recognize what you did would mean confronting a truth too sharp for their soft little minds. You moved in a way no one expected. Not loud, not messy, surgical, elegant, chaotic in all the right places. And they felt it, not just in their heads, in their bones. In that cold shiver that whispered, something's changed. And they all sat there, didn't they? In their polished little suits and their plastic smiles, eyes fixed on the scoreboard, waiting for you to make a mistake, because that's what they were promised. That you'd fail if you didn't follow their precious little rules. Step 1, step 2, step 3. Dress like this, talk like that. Don't question too much. Don't shine too bright. And for a while, maybe you tried. Maybe you even thought they were right. You stood in line, held your breath, did everything they said, and still they laughed. Still, they locked the doors. Still, you were never enough for a game. You were never supposed to win. So one day, you stopped. Just like that. No announcement, no explosion, just silence, and then movement. You didn't flip the board. You set it on fire. You didn't beg for a seat at the table. You built your own damn table and served dishes no one had the taste buds for. And the best part? You didn't ask. You didn't wait. You didn't need their manual because you realized it was written by people terrified you'd never need it in the first place. What they call rebellion, what they label as dangerous or unstable, is really just independence they can't control. You didn't just walk a different path. You carved it with your teeth if you had to. You danced through a minefield barefoot and came out laughing. That's not luck. That's refusal. Refusal to be ordinary. Refusal to be predictable. Refusal to be predictable. Refusal to be owned. You played their game long enough to learn the cheat codes. Memorize their tactics, mimic their smiles, listen to their sermons, and then you weaponized it. You turned their own systems inside out, used their own tools to collapse the cage. You knew the script so well, you could rewrite it mid-performance, and not a single one of them saw it coming. That's not rebellion. That's mastery. And when it worked, they didn't clap, of course not. They don't applaud what they don't understand. They looked around, confused, offended, terrified that something slipped through the cracks they spent years cementing shut. That something was you. Not tamed, not filtered, not polite, just raw, real, unpredictable energy that couldn't be boxed, branded, or broken down into something they could sell. See, they don't fear failure. They fear unpredictability. They fear the kind of mind that doesn't panic when the plan falls apart. That kind of mind that laughs when the map runs out. Because you didn't need a map. You were the compass. That's the thing they'll never say out loud. You made your own north. And now they pretend they always believed in you. They post quotes about resilience and pretend they weren't the ones praying you disappear. But they know, deep down, they know. You didn't follow the rules. You rewrote the entire damn game mid-round. While they were still reading the instructions, you walked in without credentials, without permission, without a single ounce of apology, and made it undeniable. They'll try to study you now, pick you apart. They'll make documentaries and call it visionary. They'll say they knew you were special. They'll interview each other like they were part of it. But you know better. You remember the silence, the eye rolls, the pitying looks. You remember the way they said, be realistic, like it was a compliment. You remember every damn door they slammed and the way they smiled while doing it. But now, they're rattled. Now they're scrambling to catch up to a movement they didn't start. They're taking notes from someone they once dismissed as reckless. That's the irony, isn't it? You were never reckless. You were deliberate. Every laugh, every stumble, every sideways step, it all led here. You didn't arrive by accident. You stormed in, and they didn't see it because they weren't looking. They were too busy watching each other. They thought they were safe behind rules, safe behind tradition, safe behind the same steps and the same blueprints. And now you've gone and made history out of improvisation. You've turned chaos into choreography, made the unthinkable look effortless. That's what happens when someone with nothing to lose decides the game doesn't deserve their fear. That's what happens when the underdog learns the system is made of smoke and mirror, when the outsider stops knocking and starts building something louder than the gate could ever silence. Funny thing about chaos, people see a mess, a problem, a breakdown, but you saw a canvas, a stage, an invitation. While they scrambled for structure, you danced between the cracks. While they clung to routines and lines and order like it was oxygen, you were over there painting the sky with gasoline and laughing like it was jazz. Because what they call chaos, that was your native tongue. That was your home. You didn't just survive the storm, you spoke to it. Precision, they said, comes with control, with discipline, with neat little graphs and 5-step plans and instructions that make sure nobody feels uncomfortable. But you didn't walk in with a plan, you walked in with instinct. You trusted your pulse over their protocols. And when they stared in horror, mouths twitching, trying to figure out whether to stop you or study you, you already had your answer. What they mistook for chaos was your precision in disguise. They're used to people who ask permission before creating, people who get approval before they move. But you moved first. You acted while they hesitated. While they held meetings and ran projections, you slipped through the cracks, smiled at the surveillance, and planted a flag in a place no one even thought to look. Then you turned around and said, "Oops, was this important to someone?" Oh, the pain, the scrambling, the rewrites. You weren't supposed to do that. It wasn't in the manual. And that's why it worked. They'll call it luck. They always do at first. Because to call it skill would mean admitting you outplayed them, that your madness had method, and that you were operating 10 steps ahead while they were still checking for typos. They can't say that. No. So they call it chaos. They say, must be luck. Or they're just reckless. Or it's a one-time thing. But it's not, is it? It's you. And you're not going away. You don't fit their algorithms. You're the glitch that passes through undetected until it's too late. And by the time they realize what happened, the board's already shifted. They think you're playing checkers when you've built a whole new game with no corners, no colors, no king, just momentum. and that terrifies them. Not because it's messy, but because it works. Because deep down they wish they could move like that, be that free, that honest, that dangerous. They want results, but they want them delivered politely. Clean, predictable. But nothing about evolution is polite. Nothing about transformation is clean. You didn't ask for permission because you knew they'd never give it. You saw the cracks in the wall, and you didn't call maintenance. You kicked your way through. And while they argued about whether or not the room was fireproof, you lit a match and rewrote the temperature. Precision doesn't always look like a spreadsheet. Sometimes it looks like destruction, like madness, like risk. But when the dust settles and everyone's staring at the pieces, trying to make sense of what just happened, they realize it wasn't random. You didn't trip into success. You engineered it. Just not in their language. You played a song they couldn't hear and danced to it like it was the only rhythm that ever mattered. And when they finally noticed the crowd following you instead of them, they panicked. They tried to mimic it, tried to copy the chaos without understanding the structure underneath it. But it didn't work. Because it was never about disorder, it was about vision. And vision doesn't need validation. You didn't just take a risk, you were the risk. The variable, the wild card no one accounted for. And when you moved, the system bent around you, not because it wanted to, but because it had no choice. You spoke in movements they couldn't track, made decisions they couldn't anticipate, and built something permanent out of what they thought was temporary noise. They tried to label it after the fact, give it names and graphs and reasons so they could pretend they were part of it, but they weren't. They were spectators. You were the one inside the fire, shaping it with bare hands, eyes wide open, smiling like you'd seen the ending before it started. Because you had. Because you always do. It didn't happen all at once. That's the part they'll never admit. They expect revolutions to be loud, to arrive with fireworks and banners and some grand speech. But you moved like a shadow, like a whisper no one could place. You didn't slam doors, you let them close behind you. You didn't shout for attention, you made silence feel like thunder. And when the shift began, no one even realized it was you pulling the strings, flipping the switches, changing the shape of everything they thought was solid. Because the impact wasn't instant, it was slow, seismic, the kind that hums beneath the floor for months before the buildings start to crack. They didn't see the moment. That's the magic of it. They were too busy looking for explosions, for a villain, for a scapegoat. But you weren't trying to destroy. You were becoming something they didn't have a file for. And every little thing you did, every decision that seemed random, every step that looked off course was part of it, part of the shift, a quiet reprogramming, a virus in the system with a smile and no return address. You didn't chase applause. You didn't even need witnesses. That's what makes it so hard for them to accept. You weren't doing it for the claps or the headlines or the spotlight. You did it because the old way didn't fit. It itched, it burned, it felt like wearing someone else's skin. So you tore it off, inch by inch, and built a new one that fit like a second soul. And when people finally noticed, it wasn't because you asked them to. It was because the air had changed, and they couldn't breathe the same way anymore. They thought you needed noise, but you made silence scream. They thought you needed followers, but your shadow led armies. They thought nothing had changed because they couldn't see the ground shaking. But tremors aren't seen, they're felt. And by the time they felt it, truly felt it, it was already too late to stop it. The system they worshipped had already shifted beneath them. They'll try to pinpoint it, try to write reports and give interviews and act like they know the moment it all changed. But they won't find it, because it wasn't a moment. It was 1,000 little sparks they ignored until it was a wildfire swallowing the sky. They thought it would take a miracle or a meltdown to change the world, but you did it with small moves, with patience, with unshakable intent hidden behind a crooked smile and eyes that saw 10 years into the future. You didn't need their validation. That's what really unnerves them. You moved like someone who already knew. Not guessed. Knew it would work. Knew you didn't have to explain yourself. Knew that if you just kept going, just kept breathing fire in a world that handed you water, eventually they'd have no choice but to notice the heat. That kind of certainty scares people, because it's not loud, it doesn't beg, it waits. And when it comes, when it finally lands, it doesn't knock, it doesn't ask for a seat. It turns the room inside out and makes everyone rethink the furniture. That's what you did. Not by demanding it, not by declaring it, but by being it. A presence that warped gravity and pulled everything around it into orbit. And they'll say, but how? When did this happen? And the answer is always the same. Slow, quietly, relentlessly. Your impact didn't punch through the wall. It dissolved it. Ate away at the edges until there was nothing left but open space and the sound of a new rhythm. A rhythm they didn't recognize but couldn't resist. And in that space, in that uncomfortable silence where old systems used to live, your voice echoed without needing to shout. That's the real threat, isn't it? Not the sudden boom, not the dramatic gesture, but the quiet persistence of someone who doesn't stop, someone who keeps showing up, keeps building, keeps existing with such conviction that the world has no choice but to bend around them. You didn't need to be seen to change everything. You just needed to be seen to change everything. You just needed to be seen to change everything. You just needed to be seen to change everything. They'll try to reverse it, try to paint over it, but it's too late, because the shift already happened. It's not coming. It's not theoretical. It's done. And the echo of what you did will stretch further than any of them can predict. Not because you forced it, but because you moved with a quiet, seismic power they never thought to fear until it was already under their feet. They thought silence meant defeat, that your stillness was surrender, that walking away meant giving up. They laughed behind curtains, clinked glasses, whispered that it was over for you. You see, the world loves a loud fall, something to point at, something to mock. They expect their heroes to die publicly, dramatically, with fireworks and shame. But you vanished. You disappeared like a magician's last trick, and they took that as a win. They didn't realize what you were doing in the dark. You weren't broken. You were becoming something unrecognizable. And that's what terrifies them the most now, isn't it? That you didn't stay down. That you didn't come back looking the same. You disappeared. And instead of decay, you chose evolution. They expected ruins. You built a kingdom. Not out in the open, no, that would be too easy. You built it under their feet, in the silence, in the places they forgot to watch. You learned things in that silence, things no classroom or mentor could teach. You learned how loud your heartbeat can be when it's the only thing you can hear. You learned how to stitch your own wounds when applause is nowhere to be found. You learned that the mirror doesn't lie, but it doesn't always tell the full story either. So you stopped looking into it for answers and started carving your truth elsewhere. They thought they could erase you, scrub your name from their files, delete the proof, rewrite the version of events that made them feel safe. They tried to overwrite your history with their cowardice, pretend you never mattered, pretend the room didn't feel colder when you left. But people don't forget fire. They pretend to, sure. They water it down with gossip and opinions and polite little lies. But deep down they remember, because fire leaves ash. Fire leaves heat. They forget that those who vanish aren't always lost. Sometimes they're just waiting. Sometimes they're gathering. Sometimes they're sharpening the edges of their soul until they can cut through illusions with a whisper. You didn't disappear because you were defeated. You disappeared because you got tired of dancing for people who couldn't hear the music. And while they played pretend with your name, you rewrote the script without needing their stage. And now they look around and wonder how it happened, how the narrative flipped, how you went from forgotten to feared, how someone they marked as done became the blueprint for something they can't even categorize. But they never saw the work. They never saw the hours, the pain, the peeling back of every soft layer to find the steel beneath it. They never saw you rebuild with shaky hands and clenched teeth. No audience, no credit, just grit. That's what makes it beautiful, isn't it? Not the return, but the way you returned. Not with fireworks, but with presence. With gravity. With eyes that saw through the costume of the world. You didn't need to scream to be heard. You just needed to be. And now every room you enter adjusts its temperature to match you. Not because you asked it to, because it can't help it. They tried to erase you, but they didn't know what kind of ink you were made of. Not the kind that fades under pressure, the kind that stains, the kind that bleeds into the pages they tried to write you out of. You weren't some chapter, you were the footnote they couldn't explain, the plot twist they didn't see coming, and now they have to live with the fact that the story only made sense once you reappeared. You were never chasing revenge. That would have been too small for someone like you. You weren't trying to prove them wrong, you were trying to prove yourself right. There's a difference. They act out of fear. You moved from truth. That's what separates the erased from the eternal. One hides, the other waits, and waiting is what broke them. They thought they'd won. But the silence wasn't surrender. It was transformation. It was the cocoon that they mistook for a coffin. And when you you stepped out of it, wings full of storm, eyes full of prophecy, they finally realized you weren't coming back because you never left. You just stopped being something they could understand. Funny, isn't it? The way people act like loyalty is disposable. They pat you on the back when you're useful, whisper your name in bright rooms, but the second you're no longer convenient, you're suddenly a ghost in a story they swear they never read. They pretend you never mattered, pretend the sacrifices you made were just background noise. You get rewritten, reduced, cropped out of the group photo like you were never part of the frame to begin with. It's not personal, they'll say, just business, just timing, just life. But that's the joke. They always think you won't notice. Oh, but you do. Every cut, every closed door, every conversation that stops when you enter the room. You hear the pauses, you see the shift in eyes. You learn quickly how fast people will pretend not to know you once the tide changes. And what do they do when you call it out? They laugh. Say you're overthinking, say you're paranoid, gaslight you into believing maybe you really were the problem. But deep down, there's this itch under your skin that tells you, no, you were right. You saw what you saw, you felt what you felt. They tried to erase you, and not in some grand villainous way, no dramatic showdown, no big betrayal, just neglect, quiet, careful, slow abandonment. It's the most polite kind of execution, really. They don't shoot you, they just stop returning your calls. They don't push you off the stage, they just stop booking you. You don't disappear, you get faded, backgrounded, edited out with surgical precision until even you start wondering if you ever mattered in the first place. But see, that's the part they always forget. You don't need their script. You don't need their stage. Because somewhere along the way, while they were erasing you, they forgot that you were never here to impress them. You weren't built for applause, you were built to last. And you learned something dangerous in that silence they stuffed you in. You learned that being alone doesn't mean being empty. That solitude is not the same as surrender. You started to see things for what they really are. How the same hands that used to clap for you were the same ones that held the knives. How their praise was just a leash and your obedience was the currency. And when you stopped giving it, they started the quiet campaign to turn you into a ghost. But you weren't haunting them, no. They were haunting themselves because deep down they knew you were just quiet. And quiet people are dangerous. You didn't vanish because you were weak. You stepped back because you were watching, observing, letting the masks fall on their own, one by one. You didn't need to pull them off. People always reveal themselves if you wait long enough. So you waited. You sharpened. You gathered all the broken pieces they left you with and forged something they can't comprehend now. Something too sharp, too bright, too real for their filtered little world. And now, every time they see you, they flinch, even when they smile, because you remind them of who they really are, of what they did, or what they didn't do when it mattered. You're the living proof that they failed to bury something that refused to die. And that burns, that eats at them. Because erasing you was supposed to be permanent. You weren't supposed to resurface stronger, clearer, untouchable. Now they can't control you, can't frame your story, can't predict your next move. And that makes you a problem they can't ignore anymore. Because your presence is a mirror, and nobody likes looking at the mess they made, especially when it's still breathing, still smiling, still walking. You became the glitch in their system, the crack in the paint, the voice in the crowd they can't quite locate, but feel down to their bone. They see you now. They won't say it, of course. That would require admitting they were wrong, admitting they beat up on something divine too early. But their silence now is different. It's not ignorance. It's fear, respect, maybe even regret. But you're not waiting for apologies. You're not holding out for recognition. Because you realized long ago that the world doesn't reward truth. It punishes it. And you spoke it anyway. You didn't just return, you became something else entirely. Not a comeback, a correction. Not revenge, revelation. You didn't scream for the spotlight, you lit a match and made them watch the whole stage burn down without ever touching a single flame. And now in the ashes they see you, not as they remember you, but as you always were. They called you impossible, said the odds were too high, the climb too steep, the wound too deep. They looked at you like a lost cause, like a case study in failure. They wore those smug little grins, the kind people put on when they think they've got the ending figured out. See, the world likes boxes. It likes labels. It wants to understand you quickly, summarize you in a sentence, file you under, didn't make it and move on. That's what they tried to do, and for a while maybe you even believed them. Maybe you stared in the mirror and saw only what they saw. Damage, cracks, the aftermath of too many storms. But somewhere, deep inside that silence they shoved you into, something moved. A flicker, a twitch. Not loud, not dramatic, just a heartbeat refusing to stop. That's how it begins, not with grand declarations, not with perfect plans, with defiance, quiet, stubborn defiance. The kind that doesn't need to scream to be real, the kind that doesn't ask permission, and once it wakes up, it doesn't go back to sleep. Starts whispering things no one else dares to say. What if they were wrong about you? What if the broken parts weren't the end, but the beginning? What if the ruins weren't ruins at all, but blueprints? You started to move different, breathe different, see the game for what it really is. And it's not about winning, no, that's too simple. It's about lasting, outlasting the liars, outlasting the doubters, outlasting the silence, the pain, the slow erosion of belief. Because this world doesn't reward the loudest. It rewards the ones who don't die when they're supposed to. The ones who keep walking when everything says stop. And that's what you did. You kept walking. They don't talk about that part, do they? The lonely miles, the days you woke up with a scream stuck in your throat but smiled anyway. The nights when you wanted to disappear, but instead you wrote one more page, took one more step, not because you believed it would work, but because you couldn't stomach the thought of surrender. That's the part they never see. That's the part they erase from the story. But that's the real story. That's where the transformation happens. See, you weren't just rebuilding yourself, you were redefining yourself, stripping away all the voices that told you who you were supposed to be, burning down every expectation until all that was left was the raw, terrifying truth of what you could be. And it was messy and ugly and glorious. Because there's something holy about becoming something no one expected, something that doesn't fit in their boxes, doesn't play by their rules, something they can't control. You became a lesson, a warning, a spark. They used to whisper that you'd fade away. Now they study your moves, mimic your steps, quote your words without knowing their source. Because what you did, it wasn't just survival. It was alchemy. You took every no, every door slammed in your face, every betrayal, and turned it into fuel, turned it into fire. You stopped running from the pain and started feeding on it. And that changes everything. The ones who tried to bury you, they watch now. Watch with quiet confusion, nervous laughter, forced compliments. They don't know what to do with you anymore because you didn't come back looking for acceptance. You came back untouchable. You don't fit their categories. You outgrew their narratives. And now they're left rewriting the story in real time, trying to explain how someone they dismissed became a blueprint for everything they're now chasing. You were never the villain, never the failure. You were just ahead of your time. Too raw, too real, too alive for a world built on pretending. And they hated you for that, still do. But hate is just fear dressed up in a louder suit. It's the echo of their own limitations banging against the cage of your freedom. They couldn't erase you, so now they try to imitate you. But they can't. Because this, what you've become, it wasn't taught. It was earned through pain, through isolation, through a refusal to bow. You didn't ask to be studied. You didn't ask to be remembered, but they will. Because some acts of survival are so loud they echo for centuries, not because of volume, but because of truth. And truth has a way of outliving everything else. They thought you were a moment. You became a movement. They thought you were noise. You became the pulse. And now they say your name with caution, with reverence, with curiosity, not because they understand you, but because they know they have no choice but to remember you.